Oh boy. Welcome, audience, to the new podcast today. Julian joins me again. Today we're going to talk about his PhD research. He does research into minority groups, specifically psychology-wise, and how they can work better in the workplace. That's the way I read about it, at least. Can you give me a little bit more of an introduction towards it, and especially because one of the things I didn't really get from it is the necessity of it and the importance, because I didn't really get that from the article you sent me.
Okay, so in general, I am interested in what makes people feel valued or welcomed or accepted, and altogether what makes them feel more comfortable in their work environment. And my particular interest there is that, so we have okay, this is going to be tricky because I'm interested in several minority groups, and by minority groups I don't necessarily mean numerical minority, but also, for example, in terms of the powerful positions that they hold, for example, within organizations, or sort of the resources that are available to them, because we know that within organizations oftentimes you will find men at the top of the organization. For example, women are underrepresented, or ethnic minorities are underrepresented. And I wonder what that kind of dynamic has to do, or how sort of that plays out to, for example, how women feel included in the workplace, or how ethnic minorities feel included in the workplace, or my particular focus, lesbian women, gay men, and bisexual people, how they feel included in the workplace.
Based on the people that empower, or that's correlated to each other? Like how they feel inclusive compared to like there are more men empowered and the other people are not empowered as much in higher positions, and you're interested in how they are, how that makes them feel included or excluded.
So, not particularly that interest. I think it is a very broad interest in terms of, because I think when you're dealing with minority and majority groups, you have to think of questions about power and, for example, privilege as well, right? These are inherently tied, I would say, to one another. So even though that's not something I particularly address in my research, it is something that I have to be aware of, that they exist, and how that sort of, for example, creates constraints for certain people, or how that creates possibilities for other groups of people. And why is it relevant? Well, we live in 2019, almost 2020 nowadays, and we have had, for a couple of decades, I would say, this focus on, we should have more women on higher management positions, or we should have a more diverse workforce in terms of our the ethnic representation of our staff members, and still that's not working. So even though there have been lots of initiatives already, we also know from research that many diversity initiatives just don't work the way we intend or hope that they work. Which means that there's just certain, what do you call that? There's certain such strong beliefs that, like I said, create constraints for people and possibilities, and it's very difficult to break through those kind of things.
Well, what kind of beliefs do you then mean?
So, if we take, for example, so this is not my expertise, but I think it is the most. I mean, I can share my opinion, of course.
But go ahead.
Like I said, it's not my expertise, but I find it a very interesting topic. So, for example, if we look at men and women in higher management positions, for me, these are inherently linked to. So, the underrepresentation of women is inherently linked to the way we see women in society. For example, men have to be competitive, they have to be strong, they have to be dominant, they have to go out there and do what belongs to them, so to say. So it's a very active role that is expected of men. Whereas for women, they are expected to be more caring, more nurturing, more supportive, more, not wanting to be competitive, but more cooperative, so to say. And they should not be the ones going out. So that's a more sort of passive role, almost, what is expected of women.
Well, one of the things that I don't know if I disagree or agree in this sense, is that it's also shown in research that if you look at the personalities of both men and women. They are different, and
Yeah.
also that because of their personality, men are inherently more competitive than women over the general division. Like men are more likely to be disagreeable, and often, if you look at the far broad scale of how disagreeable men get, they're more likely to be even more disagreeable than women in the extremes.
Yeah.
And the same thing counts for agreeable women, and the disagreeableness is a way of being competitive. That translates out in being competitive in the workplace and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know how far you can say that it's. I definitely agree with you that that's the idea that is there, you know, but I'm not so sure how strong that still is and how much that influences people, because there's also a biological factor that plays a role in towards the expectations that we have of men and women and of the role that they will play in the end. That's what I also think.
I understand that there's a biological component, definitely. I just think that the social component is, to me, seems to be a more important factor sort of playing into this.
But based on what? Because that's not what I'm seeing.
What do you mean?
Well, based on what? Like, what is the evidence that states that it's a social value and not a biological factor?
So, I think so. We live in a capitalist society where people really appreciate, you know, people being competitive and aggressive and dominant and those kind of things, a sort of output.
Yeah.
So within that kind of economic system, the blueprint for what is an ideal worker or manager or worker in general is someone who sort of fits that ideal, which we often are more likely to ascribe to men than to women.
Yes.
So in that sense, I think because we have within the workplace, there are certain assets that we value in terms of people being able to generate profit and those kind of things, be competitive compared to their
But that's also the way that capitalism works, right? And that's also why it works, because the one that's competitive and more competent, you know, because if you're very competitive, you will become more competent often.
I disagree with that.
You disagree? Because I think my way of thinking is that if you're very competitive, you will be more likely to actually study longer, harder, and actually develop more skills even later on in life, and put, for instance, your family to the side to actually learn more skills to be better at your job. If you're a very competitive person, you're more likely to do that than if you're not as much of a competitive person. And that would translate into having more skills and being better at your job. That's the way I see it.
I think there's another dimension to that if people perceive you to be competitive, they are more likely to see you as competent, which does not necessarily, like, there's not necessarily a one-on-one translation, right? Just because you are seen as competitive doesn't mean you're competent.
That's definitely true.
And so, for example, when we talk about again, men and women in higher management positions, men are more likely to be seen as competitive compared to women, I think. I mean, there's a small group of women who are seen as competitive, but then they are sort of adhering to this almost male type of how to be, how to act, how to behave. And then they are more likely to be seen as competitive and therefore competent, which is one of the reasons why for a small group of women it might be easier to get up in the higher positions.
Well, one of the things that I just think is also a factor that plays a role is that I think it's more biological, because I think that that's where we differ, and the reason for that is that I think that so for instance, if you look at my personality, I have a more feminine personality traits than male, since I'm an extreme agreeable person. I am an extreme extrovert, and men or women are more likely to be more extroverted than men as well. So generally my personality is more towards feminine characteristics, that you could say.
But you mean the big five personality?
Yeah, okay, the big five. And one of the things that is the case is that if you look at agreeableness, that's a very important thing, is that I wouldn't want to be a leader, because the fact is that if you're a leader, everybody's going to dislike you. That's generally the way that it is, because you have to. The weird thing is the amount of responsibilities that the leader has is just crazy. First of all, you have to be sure that your department, let's say, keeps running and keeps giving quality, because if it doesn't give quality, it doesn't get money, and if it doesn't get money, people get fired, and then you have to fire people, and then people dislike you before firing somebody. And so you kind of, and then if you have to, if people not working hard enough, but people never really are, so you have to kind of push people to a certain degree, or maybe sometimes not if you have a perfect organization, but often you have to push people, or when somebody isn't working hard enough and the rest is, then you might have to fire that person, but then other people see you as a terror as well, so they're going to, so that it's really a disagreeable position to be in. Like, people are going to dislike you, and as an agreeable person, I know that it's very difficult to be disliked if you're agreeable, and I think that that's also a thing that I think that I definitely think that there are women who can handle that and who are disagreeable enough to handle that. I just don't think that there will be a statistical 50-50 in that sense. I think because of the differences in the disagreeable versus disagreeable component that's different between men and women biologically. So I think that you're going to end up with a difference between 60-40, maybe 30-70, like that. That would make sense to me. I'm not sure if we're there yet, but
I mean, even if it would be 60 to 40 or even 70 to 30, then still that's not represented, for example, in the higher management positions, right?
So I do think that there might be still a social thing there, but I'm just not sure. I just don't think we can ever reach the 50-50. That's the point.
Well, I'm also not sure whether it's necessary to reach the 50-50. I mean, so one of the things that I find very surprising, very amusing, I would say, but also kind of annoying, is when people sort of have this idea that, we should have the right person for the right position, and then they just leave it at that because they never specify what is the right person. And I think saying something like that sort of does not allow for the very real reality that the different people will not be seen in the same way. Like, we will never be, or we are not very likely, if we talk, for example, in managerial positions, to evaluate a man to the same standards as a woman, for example. To have them lead an organization or even a work team. Probably we will, even though we say that we will have the same measures or the same evaluation standards for a man and a woman, I think in reality it's very difficult to really apply that without having all this sort of cognitive baggage, knowing what we think of men and women in society, how they should behave, how they should be.
That could be, yeah. I think it is really difficult. I mean, it's definitely very difficult to, in general, I would say, to judge somebody as an individual. I think that counts in any circumstance. Like, even if you compare a black female with a white female, there are also going to be different value structures that you're going to take from, and to actually just judge them by the individual is going to be very difficult. Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to have a difficulty with it, although they're not going to admit that. Yes, that's what you're talking about, right?
I think that's one of the problems. Yeah. Like, we should admit that we will not be able, whether that is for cognitive reasons or for biological reasons or for social reasons, and I think that the social aspect plays a big role in that. I think very few people are actually likely to admit that, okay, we find it difficult to judge men and women to the same standard. Yeah. And I think that is where we sort of have to look into the mirror and go, like, guys, what are we doing to ourselves? Which is what I think. I know that there's lots of people who sort of go like, oh, but it's working like this, right? Yeah. It is okay the way it is. And I'm not sure whether I whether I agree with that.
Well, what I'm sometimes afraid of is an opposite effect. I mean, I'm sitting here with my girlfriend, and I've talked about this before, and it's that there's also kind of an opposite push towards the social structure where women should go for their career and should push that extent and should go there, and it's almost difficult to now be like, no, I would like to just be a housewife. Like, you cannot say that because other people would assume that you're being oppressed or assume that you're being not truthful or that you're I don't know, that there's something going on. And I think that is also a very dangerous path to walk on, because it is shown in research that women who don't get kids are generally more unhappy in life, and that is a very a statistic I'm very afraid of. Like, it's like I see that one of the major things just in general when it comes. I think that pregnancy and the delay that we have in that sense that women leave work during pregnancy is just a massive how you call it handicap basically because it's that you're gonna have a 6 month or 9 month leave and let's say another guy in the workplace who also just got a baby is not going to do that and then you're going to stand still or even go backwards because you're forgetting stuff and you're being busy with other things in your life and the other guy keeps learning things and keeps working and that creates such a massive difference between already the two positions that it's really difficult to later on in the job to catch up on that. And I think that is one of the major problems that also cause women less being in jobs or management powers or CEOs and stuff like that.
So why don't we also allow men or maybe even enforce men to also take a long leave?
That's a good thing. I have thought about that as well.
And what is your opinion on that?
I mean, it's a really difficult question if you say like I think on one hand it makes a lot of sense, but I would even go as far as saying that I think we should, but I feel like we should even extend it to a degree where they both should be paid for it. Both men and women should be paid for actually getting off, and I'm not so sure if companies should pay for it, but actually maybe even the government, because you're saying that, well, we want both you and your husband, let's say, to be mentally healthy and also the kids to have good parents and take time for that, because that's beneficial for society later on if you don't have to pay for the kid, being something wrong with it, or you guys being burned out or whatever. So we want you guys to manage together the situation, enjoy it because it's better for society, and we will pay for that. I feel like that's a better way of doing it, because then companies also have less of a problem with it and wouldn't push their employees towards working anyways or something like that, and because it doesn't cost them money, so they would be more okay with it, and everybody I think would be kind of more okay with it, with taking that money from the government and taking that money from a company. That's what I'm thinking.
So why is this not the case yet then?
It's a very good question. I don't know.
I think part of the answer might lie in exactly what we expect from men and women, right? We expect, well, I mean, yes, it is changing. I definitely have
because
to.
In Denmark or something, or Norway, they have it, right? In one of the northern countries, I think.
I'm not entirely sure, but I mean, up there, they're always very sort of progressive in these kind of topics. I think even though it definitely is changing, I mean, compared to, let's say, 50 years ago or so, it is much more acceptable for men to, for example, have a day off to be with their kids, or even to also go on paternity leave or whatever, and to not work as much as they used to back in the day. So it is getting more socially acceptable that women are working and that men are also at home taking care of the household. And at the same time, I think even though that is changing, in our minds it's still very imprinted that the man is the one who provides and the woman is the one who cares. Maybe that is a dangerous statement to make. That could be.
I don't know. Like, I don't know if that's a dangerous statement. Because the thing is that to a certain degree, I agree with that. And I think for me, it's also partially because that's kind of the way that my parents always raised me. Like, my mom was often more at home. She did work, but she worked part-time, and my dad worked full-time. Yeah. And I think that that's just a lot of the way that people still have been raised. You know? So that's the perspective that you have, and it's like you have to be kind of a creative person to say, like, I'm going to step out of that. Yes. Somebody who's maybe like more creative, I would say, and you have to do that differently and
So it's internalized because of the way we are socialized. Yeah, like you say, like we see our parents and we sort of copy their sort of structures. Maybe at a certain point we will diverge, but in the beginning we sort of see, oh, this is how my parents do it. This is probably how it's done in the world. But at the same time, it's also institutionalized because we know that. So, for example, women do get paid maternity leave. I don't even know what the situation is in different countries, but sort of women have to take maternity leave, and sometimes they're paid and sometimes not, whereas men maybe get 1 day or so to be there at the actual birth, and then the next day they're back at work. So in that sense, it's both sort of a socialization process, but it's also very much enforced in the way we manage our work, so to say.
But just the difficult thing with this topic is just it's very difficult to determine to what degree it's biological and to what degree it's social, because it's like there is a preference, and it's like it's because you don't want to push it too far and go against the biology. That's because that's dangerous. Then you're really enforcing things on people that the biological structure doesn't want, or can't adapt to or whatever, and that's really difficult. You don't want to go there, and that's something that I'm always afraid of, that would happen, that we would change the rules in the work environment or something like that. And it's also that I feel like that's happening a lot, because I've read, there was a while ago, a month, 2 months ago, there was a report that women still get 60% paid less in high position jobs in the European Union or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, let's check out this report. I never read these reports. Now I want to, for once, I want to know what they're actually based this on. And I went through the whole report, and I was like, I couldn't really find it. It was really unclear, and I there was like a couple of sentences, and they basically compared the average amount of income of a man in high position jobs and to the average income in a year of a woman in a high position job, but without any hourly hours worked or whatever taking into account. And I'm like, well, that's a very bad way of saying that women get paid less than men. Like, you're just looking at the end numbers. You're not looking at any of the ways you got there. It's like watching a football game and being like, oh, it's 3-0. Well, that's unequal.
But
yeah.
They didn't include any sort of control variables, like control for hours, working hours per week or years of experience.
Not in the original article that I read.
I see.
But then what happens is that they take that, and then other media take that, and it's like, oh, there's a 16% difference. And then they post it everywhere, and then everybody gets to know it, but nobody actually reads the original report.
Yeah.
And then there's suddenly the idea in the society again, like, yeah, women in Europe still get paid less. And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know if they get paid less, because that's not what is written in the article. They haven't really based it on anything. Yeah, women get paid less in a year than men in a high position job, but you don't know if that's like, if they get paid less or more an hour. Like, you don't know. Like, it's not in the report, and that's something that happens a lot in society, and that creates this idea of very often that women still get paid less. And then I don't know to what degree that keeps happening on other levels as well. And there's because I'm young, so I haven't met a lot of people around their 30 or 40s, but I haven't met people that wanted to be women that wanted to be in the manager job but didn't get it because another guy got it, but she feels like she was more competent towards that. I haven't heard those stories. I only hear stories about the statistics differences between the groups, and I sometimes question very much how good those statistics, like these statistics, are. Because I'm not really seeing people read things. I just see people seeing things on Facebook and then reacting to it, and then creating this whole social idea about how the world is right now, and that they're minority groups and they need help, and sometimes they don't see even the minority groups necessarily wanting those help. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm not so sure what is true or not anymore these days when it comes to social constructions.
Okay.
That's what I'm very worried about.
I see.
What is your opinion about that? Difficult question.
Oh, it is a very difficult question. I don't know. Do you have a more sort of small scale question? Because this is a really large scale question.
Let me think about it.
That's a great song.
What?
Let me think about it.
I don't listen to that kind of music a lot, but
do you know the song that I'm talking about?
I think so.
Good.
I think so.
Yes.
But let me think about it. A small scale question like this. Well, for instance, what we were just talking about with the men. Like, I don't know if we're assuming here that it would be beneficial for men to take a leave or even be forced to take a leave. But do men actually want to leave?
You could also turn the other way around. Do women want to leave just because they have this biological function that they are the ones procreating, creating new children? Do they want to leave?
Yeah, but they're biologically forced to. They're not
exactly.
But they're not forced by society.
Are they not?
No.
Are you sure?
Well, I mean, they are more forced by biological factors than society factors.
I'm not sure because, so for example, earlier you were talking about how women who do not have children, research shows that they are more unhappy. And I think it's very difficult to determine whether that is really these individual women's predispositions or whether it's like their internalized beliefs about how a woman should be in society. That a woman should, I mean, from very early onward, I think kids get imprinted with the idea that women should be good caretakers, for example, of their own children. So already growing up, sort of girls are sort of socialized into this believing that, oh, they have to be women who raise children at some point. So it's very difficult to then distinguish to what extent this is really this individual woman's wish to have or a disappointment with not having children, or whether it's the expectation or belief that she has, that society has of her because she is now a childless woman. If you see my point.
I see your point. The thing is that questions to me because to a certain degree you can argue that so society, if you look at society is a structure that has arisen by social contracts, and over time we have created a stable society based on those contracts and ideas and values that we all have, and we have risen to a degree where now we are like a really civilized society. And you can argue to a degree that to that extent that if society has a certain assumption, why wouldn't that be true? Or at least the most true or the most agreeable thing that we as a society have agreed by years of evolution and by years of telling each other stories about different type of people. Because I'm not so sure if it's true, but it works, and it's I feel like it's very dangerous to start tampering with that and to changing those values and those ideas, because this works, and if you temper, and it's a fucking miracle that it works, because I mean, we have phones, we have computers, we have microphones, we can film it, we can put it on YouTube and everything. It works, and it's crazy, and it's like, and if we're gonna tamper with those value systems and those ideas and those we have as a society, then that can also make it crumble and fall, because we don't know what we're doing. We have told stories and created these values over years of, I think, thousands of years of telling each other stories and ideas about what a man should do and what a woman should do, and then to now to say that that's wrong and we should change that because we should all be the same is that I don't think that that's true. I think that's very dangerous for the way that it functions. Like, I'm not so sure if it's necessarily true in the sense that it couldn't be different, but I am sure that pretty sure that it couldn't be different while having the society the way we have it. We would first have to probably go back a couple thousand years and then to re-arise with different structures, because we're built on those values, as far as I think.
Okay, so if we take that as our starting point, then I still think we have to reflect on what that means for certain people. Like, there are certain people who will inevitably then end up with an advantaged positions, whereas other people will end up in disadvantaged positions.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think if we take that to be, which I'm not sure about either, sort of the way things are, and that we just have to accept that this is what it is based on thousands of years of sort of shared I don't know, value creation or whatever, then we still have to go like, okay, so men are advantaged in society compared to women, and white people are compared to black people advantaged in society. And I think there's very little first awareness and realization and reflection on what that then means for example, the way we treat each other, or the way we think about each other, or the way we behave towards one another.
Well, I would say that we definitely have to talk about it. I mean, but I'm just saying that I don't think we should forcibly, with a society, force people to do certain things differently just because we want to make it look more equal or more fair. And that's what I mean with that. Yes, maybe women, take leave, and maybe they don't want to, but it doesn't mean that therefore we should also do the same thing with men and let them not go to work just because women don't want to go to work at the same time as well. A more logical way would then be saying is like, all right, let's then say that women have their own choice of, even if they're 9 months or 8 months pregnant or 9 months pregnant, they can go to work. Sure. Yeah, you want to do that.
But then you put the burden on women.
Well, but they get to choose. Like it's a freedom of choice.
I don't
Why
think.
not?
I mean, they don't get to choose because they're just biologically the ones who have to create children.
Yeah, but that's unfair.
It is.
But that's the same thing as saying that, evolutionary speaking, men have always been the ones that go towards exploring and towards chaotic situations, and are more likely to therefore have dangerous jobs. Like men have way more dangerous jobs than women, and there are pictures, for instance, of New York where back in the day men were building skyscrapers and they were sitting without any safety there, and they're also still on very right now in the world, like most dangerous jobs are done by men, and there's a reason for that. That's also unfair. Are you then going to force women to take 50% of those dangerous jobs? It's like, that's not a way of solving it. You know, that's the same kind of logic when you say that men should also take leave.
I'm not sure whether I agree to the extent that out of the two sexes, women are just the one that are one of their main tasks, so to say, is procreation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that is something that I believe, but that is something that society really enforces. And I mean, but biologically speaking, women are just the ones who have to procreate.
Yeah, I mean,
out of men and women, it's all women.
It's all women. We can't go around that.
No, I mean that's one of the sort of certainties that we have in life.
Till we create robots who can do it, but
yeah, maybe that's not best either. I don't think we need to create a superior species. I don't know. I'm out of words at this point.
Well, it's interesting what you say. Like, so to say, the thing is that with the pregnancy thing, it's a really good starting point to kind of like, there's a biological difference in men and women.
Yes.
And that changes the way that we have to live life, forced by biological factors.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then the question becomes, okay, well, because it holds value, like, I mean, being able to procrastinate and men not being able to, that holds an inevitable amount of value, because as a society we would like women to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I feel like it's to a certain degree undervalued right now in society, in an economic way. Like, being pregnant isn't being paid for.
No.
It's not economically valued.
No.
And that's weird, because it's one of the most viable things we have in society, you know, because we would like to have kids and to continue our society,
mm-hmm.
but the most important task is not being paid for. And there's only one gender that can do that, and those are women, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is a problem, because if you're not going to value one of the most essential things of our society in an economical way,
mm-hmm.
then they're going to... that group of people is going to feel unvalued or less valued or neglected to a certain degree,
mm-hmm.
economically speaking. And then also the statistics are going to show that, and you're going to be like, yeah, you know, they earn less and whatever, you know, and it's going to be a problem. But I feel like that is just a really big problem, that's not seen as a job. And even staying at home and taking care of your kids, if you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter. It's like, to a certain degree you could argue that you should be paid for that, because it's more beneficial, first of all, if you have children, to raise them yourself and not send them to the daycare, because it's actually better for their own mental health when later on in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And that in return is better for society itself. You know, like, because then we don't have to pay for healthcare or less for healthcare for those kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so even those type of things, like staying at home, taking care of children, are things that we don't value as much as we maybe should.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying we should pay thousands of euros a month maybe to those people who do,
mm-hmm.
but maybe we should value it to a certain degree and give them something in return, at least in an economical way, to kind of, because as a capitalist society, we do always look at money. You know,
mm-hmm.
and that's basically our basis for valuing something, yes or no,
mm-hmm.
in a very broad sense. And if you're not going to value those things, then you're going to have kind of an internal problem.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think I see your point. So that is, you're sending a very strong signal, right? By sort of going like, oh yeah, oh, you're pregnant. Oh, well, that's too bad. Now you cannot earn any money. Okay, and then now you will maybe miss out on that promotion, and now you will find it more difficult to go up the career ladder. It's very, I think it's very problematic that we're sending that kind of signal to men and women.
Why isn't that true?
What?
Is it not true?
I think it is. I think this is the case.
Yeah, but why is it then a problem? Because why is saying the truth a problem?
In what way?
Well, are you saying that it's maybe a problem to signal this type of things towards men and women?
Yeah.
So how is telling the truth a problem? Because it's reality, right?
I mean, so telling the truth is that women get children, and that makes them for a certain amount of time not able to do work, to get money, whatever that is. And then when the children are there, most often they are expected to take care of the children, and of the household as well. So put that all together, and if you then take an economic perspective, like you say, that is not being valued economically seen, but also then women are at a disadvantage because they don't get paid for something that they are the only sex to be able to do. So I do agree with you in that sense, that so I think that is the weird thing, that even though we know that women are the only sex who can procreate, we in a capitalist society are not giving them sort of the incentives almost to make that sort of a valid option or equally valid compared to men.
Yeah.
Because they are for a certain time out of their work, and then they do get paid, of course. Well, that's not even the case in all countries around the world. So I think we have to think of the implications that this has for men and women alike.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm more of I don't like the idea, like I to a certain extent I'm also very agreeing with the fact that it's a biological disadvantage, and I'm not so sure if we should fix that. I'm not so sure if we should fix it, but I do think we should value it, because it is valuable. Like, like that's really what I think. It's like, and I don't think we do that enough. Like honestly, like if you give me the choice of, okay, are all the women in the world gonna work as competitively as men, or are they gonna take care of children? I really want them to take care of children, not because I think that that's what they are better at, because I think it's more important than them doing work. I think it's more important to have women who bear children, because if we don't have children. That's the simplest way it is, you know what I mean? And so it's not for a reason that I see women as caretakers or better caretakers or whatever. It's just because they're the only ones that can bear children, and if I have a choice of them bearing children or not, it's definitely bearing children. And I don't have that choice. They have that choice. But I would like society to give them a feeling of that it's equally valued by society to bear a child than to keep working.
Which is now not the case both economically and socially.
Exactly.
I see.
And that's I see that as a problem.
Okay, definitely. Good. I agree with that.
Yeah, we're agreeing somewhere.
I think we can agree on multiple things.
Yeah, definitely.
But also this is very complex issues that we're discussing, right? I mean, there's so many factors, and there's people who are way, way, way more intelligent who have thought about this and who still haven't been able to come up with a solution. Yeah. So,
but it's still interesting to learn from your perspective, because it does give me things to think about again.
The difficult thing is we will never be able to know what is true or what is not true. For example, in the big debate about biology versus social, it's how are we going to ever know? Yeah, it's really it's impossible.
Yeah, maybe in 1,000 years or something.
No, not even that, because for example, if you do want to biology versus social structure, so to say, then you have to do something that's completely unethical, which is take a couple of babies just after they're born, put them together, from different parts of the world, put them all together in one isolated thing, and then see what happens. But that is, No.
No way.
Even in 1,000 years, I don't think that is ethical. I hope not, at least. Well, maybe if we have the robots who can procreate and then can sort of, create their own. I don't know.
Maybe at some point, if we can create a virtual world that we can test this hypothesis out and then just create virtual babies who start at a certain point based on the factors, neuro factors in the brain of actual babies, and we can import them into a surreality, and maybe then.
And then we will hopefully be a bit closer to an answer.
Exactly. But so let's go a little bit back to your research. Okay. That's where we started, you know? And
sort of.
That's sort of where we started. You mainly research, if I'm correct, lesbian women, gay men, and bisexual people, right?
Yes, in the workplace.
Because I was actually quite interested in that, because I've never thought about it.
Okay.
Just never. In general, like if it was a problem, or in general, I've also never really. I never had a colleague or something that was. I did have a colleague once that was gay, but never really thought about it or anything. Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't know it was even an issue or something that would be researched.
Yeah. So the thing is, assuming that you're straight, for straight people, it's very sort of easy to forget. Because we live in what they call heteronormative society, which is sort of the implicit assumption that everyone you meet wherever you go will be heterosexual. And this is such a strong sort of principle by which we live our lives very unconsciously. It's imprinted at us from birth, and whether that's biological or social, that can be debated. But the reason does not have to be sort of contested. We just know that everyone assumes that everyone you meet is heterosexual.
Yeah, definitely.
So therefore, for many people, sort of going like, oh, I don't have to think about this because this is not an issue for myself as a human being. And if we pair that with what they call in the literature heterosexism, which is sort of this societal system that is built to sort of advance heterosexual people over people who do not identify as heterosexual, for example, in terms of marriage, or in terms of equal rights, or in terms of something like visibility in the media, stuff like that. We just have a whole system of sort of institutions that promote the superiority of heterosexual people over people who do not identify as that.
What do you mean with superiority?
Superiority in terms of it is very superiority in terms of not that people who identify as heterosexual feel superior, but we just know that they will never run into the same risks as people who, for example, are lesbian or gay, in terms of in fewer instances. I'm not saying this will never be the case, but they oftentimes don't have to think about, for example, holding hands in public, or kissing their partner in the streets, or whether they are allowed to get married in a certain country, or whether they will be called names because of who they're in a relationship with. And all these things and many more things are something that can concern LGBT people.
Also in the workplace.
Also in the workplace, but also in society at large. It's not just sort of confined to the workplace. It's also happening in the school systems, right? For example, in the Netherlands, one of the most common, degrading words to call each other is gay. I think it's the most common,
probably
the most common thing that. And so by using, for example, if we use that as an example, then if people call you gay, that is something, inferior. You don't want to be seen as gay because that means you're weak, you're a pussy, you cannot, live up to the expectations that people hold of you. So it is not seen as on the same level. It's seen as sort of second ranked, so to say. That is what I mean by heterosexist institutions.
Yeah. Well, one of the so you're saying that they hold issues that the majority of people don't hold, and the majority of people don't stand still at those problems.
I think so, because it's something that doesn't concern them. And my point is not that people should be concerned with those. I think that should be at least an awareness of, I'm in the position that I don't have to be concerned with these kind of things. I think that will be a great first step, sort of having this realization that, oh, there is a group of people who are dealing with these kind of issues that I probably will never have to face in my lifetime.
I don't know. I find these type of topics sometimes difficult because I find it. I always look at the world from a perspective of not comparing.
Okay.
And especially myself, I like to live my life from a perspective I don't want to compare myself to others or with others.
Yeah.
And therefore I find these type of things often they are based on that because it's like you have more or less privilege than another person.
Yeah.
Because you have a privilege because you have something, or I don't have to think about that. Oh, thank God I don't have to think about it. But
yeah.
In the end, everybody has problems, and everybody has things to think about differently than other people.
I'm not saying that not everyone is facing problems, right? I mean, we all face problems of, oh, we have to sustain ourselves, we have to get food, we have to get proper shelter, those kind of things. We want some love and security in our lives. That is something that all of us are facing.
Yeah.
And my point is that there is a range of issues that some people who identify as such and such are not facing. I think recently I read a quote about this, which I really liked, so I'm going to say it here. So imagine you're going on a cycling trip with a friend, and there's two ways to get to the same destination, and both you and your friend cannot agree on which route you're going to take. So you are going the left way and your friend is going the right way. Now you on the left way, you discover that there's all kind of rubble on the path, and also you get a punctured tire because of that. So you have to walk at a certain point, then you're out of water, and on top of that you get a sunburn. So in the end, it takes you a lot of effort and it's very difficult to get to your destination, but you do get there. Then when you're there, you have to wait for 3 hours for your friend to finally arrive because they took the right way, so the right track, so to say. And what happened there is they were chased by a bear. Then there was an avalanche that sort of got them off track. Then they realized that they had forgot their tent, so they had to get it back from the avalanche. Only after that to find that there was someone in dire need of help, so they had to perform first aid. I do not know. I'm just giving random examples, which made them arrive so much later at the destination than you did. So even though you're at the same starting point and you have the same destination, you can both have very, very different travels, so to say. Now, this is all very external in terms of, there are things happening to you. And I think that is part of the story. And also there is part of the story which is just internal, because you and your friend maybe have same characteristics in terms of you're both a human being, you both own a bike, and you both want to really go to the destination. At the same time, you may also have different characteristics. So for example, you may have more stamina than your friend, or you may have a better food preparation package, I don't know, or you may have a better bike, so to say. I do not know whether I'm really dumbing it down or, making it very simple, which, social reality is super, super complex. So
so you mean that at the start you might have different beneficial factors, but on the road it's going to be difficult for both sides, but they both want to go to the same destination in the end.
Yeah.
Summarize.
So, and that destination can then, for example, be, having proper housing, and it can be that you have food and that you have a loved one and that kind of thing. So, friends and a nice job and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So everyone in the end, if we take a really, really big perspective, I think many people sort of want the same thing in life, which is, right, to sort of feel secure and feel loved and have affection and that kind of thing. I think that all in all, of course, there's cultural differences in what is more or less important, but sort of on a very universal level, people will sort of have the same wishes for their life. But there's different journeys to get to that. And some journeys are easier than others. I think that is sort of what it boils down to, this idea.
Yeah, but we don't know. I don't think you can determine which journeys are easier than others based on group identity.
Okay.
Because I think that maybe a larger amount of certain groups seem to have more negative effects. But even we're talking about such big groups of people that that there is always like an example of other groups of people, and we don't have the data we don't know everybody's lives, and it's really, I don't think that based on a tragic story you can determine if something is someone's life is more difficult or less difficult than another person.
Okay. But if we aggregate that to a group level, we can, I think, agree on the idea that for heterosexual people, it's easier to live in many societies than for people who are gay.
No.
You disagree?
Yeah.
Why?
Because you can't really generalize groups of people like that.
Well, for example, just a really easy example.
Okay, so let's say
Yeah.
Because you're comparing a broader group of people to a more specific group of people, right? But it's make more sense to compare two specifics, to two groups to be different, because you're talking about a group. Like you can argue that it's always more difficult for a group of people when they are different than the most common.
Mm-hmm.
It's always more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you cannot really compare a group that is the norm with a group that is more specific and is less towards what's most common. Like it makes more sense to compare a group, for instance, that has dyslexia to a group of people who are gay.
Why?
Because they're both from the norm. And they're both, because the most problems arise because they're different than the most common. That's why the problems arise. So a group of gay people have it difficult in society more than the most common, because the society is made for what is most common.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense because it's most common. Like if you're going to change the society for every single detail, then we're not going to have a society, because you gotta look at the most common things in every single departure, because else you have to change the whole education system for everybody that's dyslexic, and also for everybody that has ADHD, and everybody that has a mental disability or any other extent. You can't do that. Society is made for the most common thing that is there, and everybody who's different than that common has problems, and that's not. If you're heterosexual, okay, maybe heterosexual, so you got it good there, but maybe you got dyslexia, so that's the problem for you. But then maybe you are somewhere else. Maybe you have a allergy or something like that, so you can't eat nuts. So that's annoying. So every time you have to check your food because you eat nuts. And I think in that extent, everybody has problems that arise because we're different than common. Because nobody's common. Nobody's exactly like that, and maybe some people are more than that or less than that, so they do vary in society. But I don't think you can just take groups of people and say that they have it more difficult than the most common. Of course they have it more difficult than the most common. Every single more specified group that is different than the common has it more difficult than the common, because the society is built for that.
So if I'm not sure what the point is here, so just because it is different from the common, we should not sort of try to think of ways to improve the situation?
No, I don't think that was what I said. Because you said something with you asked me if I think that heterosexual men have it more heterosexual people have it more easy than gay sexual people.
Yes.
And I disagree with that, but I changed that answer by saying that I don't think it's a good comparison.
Why not?
Because I think that you cannot compare the most common to a specific group that's not, because the problems that arise from that, you can't compare those things, because society is made for the most common, so of course they will suffer less than the other people. That doesn't mean you don't have to still look at it, but I think you should more look at it at an individual level of how they can deal with it and with society, or help them to make rules that don't disturb the most common and the most way the society function, because you cannot push them into society by making rules around them or stuff like that, because then you have to do it everywhere. So it has to come from the individuals in that group, or it has to arise from it becoming more common and becoming it a part of the whole group, because then the group has to grow big enough to be a part as seen as the common.
But then you're putting the burden on the minority group.
Yeah.
Why?
Because that's always the case.
But that's not really fair now, is it?
Why not? Because everybody is a part of a minority group.
Yeah, that is true. And
it's my responsibility to deal with my minorities.
I'm not sure whether that is so easily said. So, for example, the whole thing about, sort of this is the common, and then people who are sort of not the common. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to face your own issues. I'm not sure whether that is a society that we should strive for, that everyone sort of has to, oh yeah, you have an individual problem, which it is not. I mean, just, okay, you say that you don't like comparing people, but maybe you are an exception.
No, I don't like comparing the common idea of what a person is with the exceptions.
But I think we have to, because in society this is what is happening.
What do you mean?
People are always going to be measured to some kind of standard, which is then, let's say, the common. And if we take sexuality in as an example, the common is heterosexual. So whenever you don't identify as such, you're always going to be the deviant, so to say. You're always going to be part of the minority.
But you're always going to be that.
Yeah.
They're not suddenly going to be 50% heterosexual men. And
no, I understand that too, but just because it's going to be a stable minority does not mean that we should not think of ways in which the majority and the minority can work together to still sort of accommodate.
I agree. The thing that I said is that I don't think that there should be necessary. How do you say this? I don't think we should push a group or the common to a certain direction in that sense. I think it's an individual level that has to communicate, talk about it, and figure it out with that group if it's an important enough issue for them. What's happening? Because I mean, it's talked about a lot, and they talk about it. But it's gonna be wrong, I feel like, when other people that are not in that group are gonna talk about it to a degree where, I mean, you do research about it, so you talk with those people. I think, but I mean, it's wrong when people who don't know about it are gonna assume things about how the group feels, and then based on that, we're gonna try and make rules about it or try to implement them. I think I like to compare it to the civil rights movement in America, where first there was a lot of like fighting for the rights and literally starting fights and stuff like that and fighting back, and then at one point they started to have these Gandhi inspired moments where they would sit in a place where they're not allowed to and get beaten but not fight back, and they would talk about it. They would show how important it was to them. They had to go through that suffering, and by going through that suffering, by showing that they're willing to suffer, they got their rights. And I think in many ways that's often the way it goes, is that it's not that you want to force it, you want to show how common, how normal you are. You don't want to show how, you don't want to force it. You want to walk up and be like, this is who we are, in a degree of going over rules, because that's what I see happen sometimes. I feel like I'm being vague.
I think so, but also just, so one of the assumptions that you say, it's very much an individual thing, you said, right? Well, I disagree with that. Imagine that you are a lesbian woman living in Nigeria. Nigeria is the country that, so I recently saw something about, you know, sort of the social but also the legal position of gay people around the world. And in Nigeria, it's particularly bad because people can get killed. Like, it's punishable by death if you identify as gay or lesbian. Now imagine that you are a lesbian woman in Nigeria, or this could take place in many other countries around the world, because I think at this point, still in 8 countries, being gay is punishable by death. So imagine 8 around the world, and there's a whole range of countries, I think around 50 or so, where there's several kinds of punishment, like imprisonment, from either 3 months to a life sentence. There's all kinds of, well, of course, social punishments. You know, your family and friends do not care about you anymore, all those kind of things. Now imagine that you live in Nigeria and you realize that you're a lesbian woman. Now, are you going to share that with anyone?
Probably not.
So then, in some way, yes, this will be your individual problem, because you are going to have to carry that burden with you for your entire life. But is it because there's something wrong with you, or is it because you are in a certain situation where the thing that just inherently is part of you is not seen as something that is acceptable? I do not think in that sense this is an individual problem. Because there's going to be other women.
It's a group problem for people who are identifying as lesbians or who are lesbians. Say that, or who feel. I don't know how you say it. If you feel lesbian, are lesbian. Yeah. Okay. I don't know which one you use, but who are lesbians. That's the group whose problem it is.
Well, I disagree with that.
Okay, why?
Because now we're sort of putting all the weight on the victim, so to say, or we're putting the burden on the person who is part of that minority group. And it's sort of like, oh, you're gonna have to deal with it yourself because we as a society, this is who we are, and you're gonna just accept it. You're gonna have to accept that and gonna have to face that you will never be accommodated for because of who you love, so to say.
Well, I don't think that is true.
Okay.
I think that putting the responsibility on the group themselves will make the group take action to a degree where they will, for instance, have a protest together.
But if they go into action, they'll be killed.
Yeah.
So imagine that someone goes to action, they're killed. Someone else goes to action, they're killed.
Yeah.
So what good will the action do then if that just gets you killed?
Well, that in the end would create you the rights, because that's what happened.
But then first, many people have to die in order to get those rights.
That's how all the rights always have been given in history.
And so we should continue to live by that system?
Yeah, well, at least in those countries, because we can't do anything about it in those countries, right? We're not in those countries. Like, that's the only thing. It's either that or you don't do anything, because you're. I agree with you. You're stuck. It's a big fucking problem. I'm agreeing with that.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't tell people, like, if you really think that is like the as a person living there, you know what I mean? If you really hate it, your life is worth nothing, and you realize that it's just so shitty, and it's because of this fucking stupid thing. I'm gonna show people that I'm a human being, and that I deserve the same rights of they are, and I'm deserved to show who I am. I'm gonna show that. And that is going to inspire people, and those people will do the same thing. And maybe you will inspire common people to even, like the most common. Maybe you will even inspire them to walk with you. That's what happened in the civil rights movement. That you inspired people to go, and even the common people started walking with them and started dying for it. Nobody forced them. Nobody said what they had to do. Nobody asked them even to. They went on their own. And I think that's the power. And I think that sometimes in a human civilization there are going to be deaths as a starting point. I think that happens all the time, everywhere. And I don't think that in Western civilization we should do that, because I think that's a different thing. But I think that in a lot of other places around the world, that's going to be necessary. And I'm not saying I'm happy about that at all. But I think that it's going to be. I think that's realistic, because that's how we got here as a Western society, by having a lot of deaths to get here.
Not only among our own population.
Exactly.
So, okay, but so you say that, okay, if we were to take this example of the Nigerian woman, then she would just have to go on the street and wave the pride flag or whatever.
Yeah, or maybe be a little bit more like tactical about it, you know what I mean? Like, maybe you can figure out maybe a group of people, maybe trust a certain group of people, maybe you know of somebody else that's lesbian or has similar feelings, or maybe is bisexual, like often it's the case that I don't know how it's there. I mean, that's difficult for me to. I have no idea how their lives is, of course. But it often starts by getting together with a group of people who are the same way or feel the same way.
But maybe that's impossible in those conditions.
No, I don't know.
No, me neither. But exactly. I have an idea.
Maybe it is.
But why should this movement start in like the worst position? Why can't we not have the movement start in a country where it's relatively okay, like the Netherlands?
But how would you start such a movement?
So not necessarily a movement. We have Pride, which is nice. But for example, if we take Pride as an example, there's still lots of people out there who are like, why do we need Pride? We don't need Pride. It's ridiculous that we have Pride. We have the same-sex marriage. What else do you want? And I just think that is a comment that shows that there's lots of ignorance about this topic. There is Pride exactly because people who are of the same sex, who walk hand in hand, still get beaten up. Also in the Netherlands. There's survey data showing from like the what do you call it? Well, it doesn't. The source is not really important. Well, the source is important. I just don't know the English word of the source, but that's okay. It's like the social data of sort of how the Dutch think, what are the attitudes of Dutch society. And also within Dutch society, we still see that people prefer, if they see, for example, two men walking hand in hand, they find that less appealing or whatever. They find it more uncomfortable to see than people of the opposite sex walking hand in hand, not even talking about kissing each other, for example, in public. So we know that even though we do have same-sex marriage, and we should be very grateful for having the sort of the distance, having traveled the distance that we have, yet we cannot, I think, allow ourselves to think that, oh, this is it. And for example, that we should no longer celebrate Pride, because also among Dutch,
we should definitely celebrate Pride.
We should definitely continue to celebrate Pride, but there's people out there who don't see the necessity of having a Pride celebration even in the Netherlands.
I think we could two things.
Yes.
Because one thing I really agree with, and one thing I really disagree with.
Okay.
The first thing I agree with, that's really the Pride thing. I don't think it's, first of all, a thing that, like, I mean, we celebrate so many things in a year, and this is one of those things where you just are like, well, they get to have a party, you know, like for years of oppression and for years of, like, they get to celebrate the fact that they have freedom.
But it's not only a party, right?
No, it's not only a party, but it is like, so that's like one part of it that I think that one reason already why it definitely should be there. You know what I mean? Like, and for that moment, it's like also a moment to remind us all that what has happened, you know, like, and how we got here.
And this continues to be necessary towards the future. Yeah,
and one of the things I question is, I'm not so sure, especially rule-wise. I think in society, a lot of things still, like, let's say the common man, you know what I mean? Still has to change his perspective of the way that the world is, and I think that will happen over time, because I mean, my grandmother, I mean, she saw the Second World War, and now gay people get married, and you know, my parents didn't get married, and she was, my grandma was very Christian, and that was really mind blowing to her, you know, like, so I think that there's still a lot of people that still, like, yeah, technically have to die, and the new people need to. I don't think we can influence that. I mean, if you have so many years of experience in your life, and I really respect that. I don't think you can change those perspectives a lot, and also I'm not so sure if, for instance, with the example you name with a man and a woman are more appealing than two guys. I agree with that, and I don't think that is because I don't say I dislike the guys, and that's also not what you said that people said. So it's like, I don't think it's that. I think it's we generally tend to like things more that we can empathize with. So if I see two women walking hand in hand, I can empathize with that because I'm not a woman, and you know, like, so it's like kind of get stuck there. And if I see two men walking hand in hand, I can empathize with that either, because I wouldn't really want to do that either. You know, but if I see a guy walking with a girl, I can empathize with that. I can see myself do that. So I think it's more appealing just for that reason. And I don't think that is wrong necessarily.
It's not wrong necessarily, but it is something that we have to, again, I think it's a lot about the awareness that we have about this. Like, people maybe become aware of, like, I find it more comfortable to watch a man and a woman walking hand in hand than two men. I'm not blaming people for thinking that, because like you say, it is more common. This is what we see. This is what we see both in our daily lives. This is what we see represented in the media. This is what we get socialized. This is the whole idea of how people get brought up. If you're a man, you go with a woman. If you're a woman, you go with a man.
Yeah, in most cases that's the case.
Exactly. In most cases that is the case, but there's also a couple of cases where this is not the case. Exactly. And I think we have to reflect, and by we I mean society. We have to reflect about what it means that we think of men and women holding hands in certain way, and what it means that we think differently. What does that imply? Does that mean that it is inherently wrong? No, it is not wrong. It's uncommon. We don't see it as often. But is it something there is a reason why it makes us feel uncomfortable? Is it just because we don't see it often, or is it something that goes against what we believe in, what we're taught to believe is right and wrong? I think we have to think more about those kind of questions without necessarily sort of immediately, oh, this is right, this is wrong, this makes me feel uncomfortable. I think we have to look at the underlying reasons. Why does this make me feel uncomfortable? And I'm not sure whether many people sort of take the time to reflect on those kind of things. And I'm not saying that is a bad thing. I mean, I wish there would be more people reflecting on these kind of things. I'm not saying I'm doing it all the time. That's very difficult, also because of the cognitive load it requires. I just hope that we will continue to realize that yes, this is how oftentimes things go, but if things don't go as we expect them to go, that is different. Why is it different, and is that right or wrong, and for what reasons?
Yeah, so you're not saying necessarily, like, you don't have to feel the same way about seeing a man and a woman hold hands as a man and a man, let's say. But
I mean, ideally that would be great, right? That it doesn't matter at all who you see holding hands.
But you're not saying that it has to be that way, as long as you do realize that it's not wrong, or that you at least go deeper to, like, okay, why do I feel uncomfortable with this, or why do I feel less comfortable with this than the other thing, and that you at least go deeper and understand yourself, that it's not because it's inherently wrong, but that's just because you maybe don't identify with it yourself, or maybe you can't see yourself in those shoes, or maybe because you don't see it as often, like that it's fine to go deeper at that level, and that's maybe it is okay to see that. Because I don't know, I don't know if because in this conversation I have a feeling often when you say something that you tend towards the equaling it out in a way of that ideally would be equal. That's what you said, and I'm not so sure if that's in every case true. Like, I think that it makes sense from a societal standpoint that minority groups have problems. Like, I think that makes sense.
In what way?
In the way that the society is constructed in a way based on overlap. Yeah. So what is most common, and there's no perfect common person, because society is based on, everybody has things that are aside, but it's based on the things that we overlap with, and everybody's gonna fall off somewhere. And I think that we shouldn't. I'm not so sure to what extent we should try to broaden society so that other groups fall into it, because I'm not so sure if that will be stable. Because I feel like society is stable because we tend to build the society on the overlap, and that makes it very stable. And I think that therefore minority groups have more issues, and I think that everybody falls in those issues. And if you're a very unlucky person who falls in a lot of those minority groups, I feel like that's really shitty. But I'm not so sure if we can do anything about it. And I'm talking about rule-wise, because I think there's a lot of difference between making rules and laws and the regulations on things, and to a certain point to have this conversation and to create more awareness in the common people, in society, about those groups, and that they are there. I think that there's a difference between that and actually making rule changes towards shifting the way that these people are benefiting or negatively being treated, or not necessarily. I mean, negatively being treated is way more harsh, but have negative effects from their minority itself. You know what I mean? I'm not so sure we should make laws and regulations to equal these out. I definitely think we should talk about it and make society more aware of it, so that we are more aware of it, and maybe from a social standpoint where we are just kind people, we could maybe help each other more out. I'm not so sure if we should regulate it. That's what and that's sometimes what I do feel like when you talk about it. I'm not so sure if I'm right about that.
I'm not sure whether regulations are going to change. So the thing that you said, like we are now in a society that is stable, but then I wonder, for whom is it stable? That is probably for like the common, even though there's no unique common person, like you say.
It's still there, so it's
stable.
True. It's stable for everybody who lives in society.
I'm not sure. I disagree with that.
Well, in Western society, in the Netherlands, I would say.
But also within that, not society is not equally stable for everyone. Like there are certain people who will perceive it to be more stable along, for example, certain I think group member or sort of identities, whereas for others it is less stable. And I think we have to reflect on what implications that holds for people, that people for whom society is less stable, that they just have to sort of conform and have to just accept that it is less stable for them, or we can reverse it and sort of look for opportunities to also create stability for these kind of people.
Yeah.
And I think that is where we do agree that it's not just like I said before, it's not it should never be the burden of sort of the minority group, because I think that is unfair, because they are already disadvantaged, and then to also sort of go like, oh, you sort it out yourselves, when for example they don't have the same opportunities or the same resources, that is putting even more burden on their shoulders, and I'm not sure whether that is the right way to go.
Well, I will give you a personal example of, so I'm dyslexic.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was terrible at languages in high school, and so I got a dyslexic degree. You know, like, or degree, I don't know, even like dyslexic, they call it
certificate
or something like that. Diagnostic, diagnosis. And now that to a certain extent fixed the problem for me, right? Because society changed something to me, and now I have 30 minutes extra to every exam and whatever I make. And first of all, to a certain extent, it doesn't give me a responsibility, because it's like, oh, I'm dyslexic, I can say that anywhere I want all the time, you know what I mean? And it makes me weak, because it's like, because now I suddenly have 30 minutes extra on every exam that I actually never really use except for math exams and exams where everybody took too long, because I didn't have a problem with reading. I have a problem with writing, and sometimes, like, if I write words wrong. So I have more problems when it comes to essays, for instance, or reports, but there were never rules about that, you know? So it's like, it's like, and it also makes me have an apology, an excuse every time I make a mistake somewhere. It's like, yeah, I'm dyslexic, or whenever, you know, and it gives me an inability to learn to a certain extent, to take the responsibility to learn, because it gives me a reason to tell myself, I'm dyslexic, it's difficult for me. Well, I really believe, because for a long time now, for over 2 years, I've been writing a lot, and I've been improving a crazy amount. Like my English right now is really good. My English grammar is really good. And it's all because I took responsibility and took action. And I think if I would take a dyslexic exam right now, I would probably not have to be dyslexic, but I'm still dyslexic according to papers. And it's like, well, do you share that to people, yes or no? So it's a similar problem where I like, oh, do you share it with people or not? Well, is it a problem or not?
Yeah.
Well, have the paper, but it's also kind of an excuse. It's like, it's very difficult to kind of like change it. And I'm also not, I have never experienced, and a lot of my friends who are dyslexic as well, have never really experienced it as a benefit. It's also like, it's a label you have, and society can suddenly recognize you, but it doesn't immediately give you benefits or whatever, even though there are benefits. But it's not that those benefits are creating better, especially in the long term. Like in the short term, it made me feel good, and you have extra time, and it's like, oh, people are listening to me. But in my experience is that in the long term, it just creates a bigger problem, because you suddenly don't take responsibility for your problem. And my problem is I wasn't good at language, and I'm still not very good at language. It's my problem, and I should fix that. And especially if I want to write, you know, I shouldn't every time I write take an excuse of like, yeah, I'm dyslexic, so, you know, like, so I'm gonna write a book, but it's gonna be shitty because I'm gonna put dyslexic on it, and you can't complain about it. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. I should let somebody else check it, and I should take the responsibility to take those actions, and that's all fucking shitty to do, and I hate doing it sometimes, you know, like, and it's really annoying to do that. But it's how I take the responsibility for my own problem, and how I have to, because society wouldn't. And I think that's a good thing, because it makes me a better person and a better writer, you know. And I think that that's translatable to other minority groups in society.
You're saying that dyslexia is a problem, so would that then mean that if you're not straight, that's a problem?
To you, it might be. It causes problems.
It causes problems, but in itself, is it a problem?
No, it's not a problem that I'm dyslexic. But it causes problems.
Yes. But those are two different things.
Why?
Like a thing being a problem or a thing causing problems. That's not the same.
No, okay. But, I mean, so if you give me the diagnosis, same thing with men who like men. If you give them the, let's say, diagnosis or the identification.
No, don't go with diagnosis, because that's very problematic. Because until 1973, when
it was seen as I know. But it doesn't. My problem is like, if you identify with it or not, it doesn't matter. You're gonna still have the problems that come from it. The same thing as a dyslexic person. I can tell my worker that I'm dyslexic, but I can also not tell it. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. The same problems are gonna arise from it anyways.
That's not true. Maybe in the case of dyslexia, but not in the case of being gay.
Well, you are, because you're still going to be gay.
Yes.
And you're still going to maybe like a coworker, or you're still gonna have certain problems. Maybe not as many, but there's definitely certain problems are gonna still arise.
But there's different problems whether you tell other people or whether you not tell people. You're not going to face the same range of problems. Yes, there's going to be some overlap in terms of, yes, you are gay, and yes, you have to live in a world that's not necessarily accommodating for that. But whether you tell other people or whether you not tell other people, there's very different implications of different actions that you have.
Why? What do you mean?
So, for example, if you decide to not tell other people, you might become very conscious of how you behave, how you speak, how you act, how you dress, how you, what you say about, what you did during the weekend, for example. That takes a lot of cognitive load on you, and there's always going to be this idea of, did I do this well? Was I manly enough here? Do you think maybe they're suspecting something that's going to cause a lot of sort of doubts, which creates a strain on you being able to sort of act normally, because everything you do is going to be very monitored by yourself. You're going to regulate yourself, which makes it very difficult to live normally, so to say, if this takes up most of your thought process.
Yeah.
And that, for example, also have behavioral implications, because if your colleagues, let's say you are at work, if your colleagues realize, hey, this person is being very weird in terms of very controlled, for example, it's not necessarily a nice person to talk to, for example, during the lunch break.
Yeah.
Or during, drinks on a Friday afternoon. Now, that can in itself already have different causes, because you might miss out, on certain networking opportunities, blah, blah, blah. So because you decide to not tell something to someone, you will face a range of consequences of that action that you will not face if you decide to tell someone, because then you do not have to, not to the same extent, you do not have to go like, oh, how am I acting? You can be a bit more free in that sense. At the same time, this can, for example, lead to other people being rejecting of who you are, or they're like, oh, I don't want to hang out with you. So that can also then have costs with it. At the same time, deciding to tell someone can also have lots of benefits. Like, people can sort of go like, oh, that's nice, I will support you. You can find other like-minded people. You do not have to be so cautious in everything you do. So sort of, yes, you go from being gay, but sort of the different actions that you have will definitely have different consequences.
I agree. Wait, I'm going to go to this toilet for a bit.
Okay.
I will remind us.
Okay.
Yes, so you're saying that, now I can think again, nice. So you're saying that the choices that I make definitely impact the way that, the problems that arise.
Yes.
Or maybe the benefits that arise as well, if you tell somebody, But what is there a difference? I don't see the difference between that. Like, of course, being dyslexic causes less sufficient problems or worse problems, less of bad problems than being, I think, gay or lesbian or in the workplace. I think that it causes maybe more severe problems if you don't tell it, or if you do tell it, it can be more difficult than being dyslexic. But I don't see the difference in what you're saying compared to what I'm saying, because if I'm dyslexic and I don't tell my boss, then I might write articles and I'm gonna have to check them immensely, because I'm like, I need to check it really, really well, because nobody can figure out I'm dyslexic without telling me. Yeah. And this can cause also a crazy amount of brain effort for me, and cause me to act really, really differently. And if I make a mistake, maybe I will react to it way worse than normal people would. And and if I tell them, then how are going to people react to that? Like, are people going to let me write those reports? Maybe I really like writing them. Maybe they will not let me write them anymore. Maybe they won't ask me for advice anymore when it comes to writing reports, and let me read their reports. Like, it's a similar issue that arises. It's only maybe less severe.
So if you compare these two, so in the literature, these are known as concealable stigmatized identities. In terms of concealable, you have a certain degree of control or choice over what you say, to whom you say it, how you say it, and when you say it. these kind of things. And stigmatized means that there is a stigma to identifying as such and such or having this and this characteristic. So in that sense, there is definitely overlap in terms of, for example, being dyslexic and, for example, being gay, because you're both facing choices that other people who do not, respectively, are not dyslexic or are not gay are not facing.
Exactly.
So in that sense, yes, there's definitely overlap. I think one of the things which is interesting here is that definitely when you're dyslexic, I think that is very directly related, and whether you tell that to other people is directly related to your work output, in terms of it will affect to what extent you will be able to do your job. Then some people will probably argue that this is also the case with your sexual identity, because it can be a very central concept. So one of the ideas
depends on the work you do.
Well, I mean that
I'm not so sure. I don't see that exactly. How do you mean that? Like, how is your sexuality related to your work?
So it's not necessarily related, but it's so ingrained in our everyday work life. So oftentimes you will have, for example, on Monday going like, how was your weekend? And if people have a partner, then it's so ingrained. People have pictures of their partner. People will share anecdotes and quotes about their family life with each other. And that is, I think this is one of the things where, being heterosexual, it's just so natural to talk about what you did with your partner, your family life, because that is an important part of your life oftentimes. Whereas for people who identify as gay, lesbian, that may also be a very central part of their life, but they still might have to think about, what would the consequences be if I were to say this or that? So that is what I mean by it is a very important part, not in terms of it being, you want to make a big thing out of it, but just because heterosexual people do not have to make a big thing out of it, it is something so natural to talk about at your work. Yeah,
it's an interesting thing, because I actually remember now you said that about the pictures, I remember that the guy who I worked with who was gay, he never said he was gay until he showed a picture, and I was and he said like, that's my boyfriend, and I was like, in my head I was surprised, I didn't expect that or something like that, but just because he acted like the normalest thing ever, I didn't really think anything, just because the way he just said it and did it was so almost like a heterosexual person sharing.
But that could be a performance, right? He could have put a lot of effort into how am I going to dress, how am I going to act, how am I going to speak.
Could be.
That could be.
Could be. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's difficult to say. But it's also, I don't know to what extent. It's really difficult to say to fill in to what extent it is a problem, and to what extent somebody thinks it's a problem and makes it a problem for themselves. I mean, I have sometimes that I have something to say to my friends and I prepare for it like crazy, and in my head I'm like, that's a huge problem. I say it and everybody's like, oh, okay. I don't know to what extent it's just one of those type of problems, and I think it's also for each single situation different, and I don't know what most situations are like, you know what I mean? I feel like that's just very difficult. Like, I'm not so, and also your age probably makes a lot of differences. Like, if you're going to tell your friends in high school, maybe that feels way more difficult, and is maybe way more difficult objectively than at any other time. I don't know. Like, so I think that there are a lot of factors that play into such a situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Yes, completely agree. There's lots of different factors to that.
And so to kind of get back to it, is that so you're researching the work environment. Yeah, and because you took the example of Nigeria, but do you do it in the Netherlands, or do you do it more broadly speaking?
So the plan for my upcoming data collection for this year is to do it in the Netherlands, but also an online study in the US.
Okay.
Lots of studies on gay workers are done in the US. In the Netherlands, it's relatively uncommon to study because, and I think one of the reasons for that is that many people sort of believe like that's not really a problem here. Why should we even discuss this? For my master thesis, I conducted interviews. So I interview people who are working at Doctors Without Borders. So those are people who alternate between working in Amsterdam in an office setting, and they sometimes then work in the office in Amsterdam, and sometimes they have to go into the field into project countries where MSF is providing humanitarian aid.
Yeah.
And I was interested in how they deal, because I interviewed lesbian and gay humanitarian aid workers, how they deal with this sort of transition going from an office which is relatively accepting and tolerant to countries where, for example, there might be the death penalty if they find out that you are gay.
Okay, so these people you interviewed who are gay themselves and would transition from place to place, they're so different.
How they deal with that, first of all, for themselves, and then second, what the organization did, if anything, to help them with that process.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I investigated.
And
so
what did you find?
what did I find?
Yeah.
So there are definitely individual factors playing a role in terms of. So I talked to 11 people, which is not a huge sample, but still I found some nice commonalities, but also differences between the people. So in terms of individual differences, for example, some people they said that their sexuality, when they're in the field, it doesn't matter. They're okay with putting that part back into the closet, so to say, because they know that they go into the field to help people who are in dire need because of an earthquake or because of man-made conflict. For whatever reason, they are there to provide acute emergency aid or humanitarian aid, more general. So the whole reason that they are there is because they are working for an organization that is providing that, and they know that in return they have to do something back for the organization, which is to put that part of their identity on hold, so to say.
Yeah.
And they are okay with that because they know that this is part of what the job requires them to do. So that's a group of people that I talked to. Then there's another group of people who said, yeah, wait a minute, that's all nice and fun, and we understand that we should not go into certain countries waving around the pride flag and being very proud and open and look at us look at MSF supporting our employees in the field. But still, we should be able to work within an organization that can guarantee our safety within certain, within all countries actually, and that can secure or guarantee that whatever happens on a mission in a certain country, we will be able to get home safely, to not be treated differently because of who we are as persons. And at the same time, it is our human right to be who we are. So then within certain boundaries, we should be able to enact that, so to say. So that was very interesting to have these different perspectives on it. And of course, there's lots of factors playing in there as well. So for example, I mean, there was some very nice anecdotes. For example, if you go to a certain place for 2 weeks for emergency aid, you can imagine that it's more it's easier to put your sexual identity on hold, as it were, than if you were to go somewhere for 6 months or for a year.
Definitely.
Because when you are somewhere for 6 months, at a certain point, if you have a partner, you may want to you may want to Skype in with them. They may even want to visit you. How are you going to deal with that? What are you going to tell your colleagues who might be from different countries, who might not necessarily be very accepting of homosexuality in general? What are you going to do with... So that's the interesting part about MSF. There's national staff members and international staff members. International staff members are people who go to another country. So for example, if a Dutch employee goes to, let's say, Nigeria, then you are an international staff member. But there's also people from Nigeria working on projects in Nigeria. That's a national staff member. And oftentimes you will find that the majority of international staff members are from Western countries like the US, Canada, European countries, or Australia. And oftentimes you will see that on a larger scale, these countries tend to be more accepting of homosexuality. Then even there will be individual differences, obviously, but you have to make decisions about what do I do if I come into a team that I'm going to be with for 6 months. Am I going to tell them? Am I not going to tell them? Well, how am I going to do it? And importantly, how might that affect our working relationship? Because in the end, you are there to help the people in need. And this can, for example, create some tension, or it can create animosity in severe cases. So that is sort of a first level of decisions that you are facing, because these are people that you are with 24/7 basically. So whatever you do, they're going to somehow find out at some point, most likely, unless you put a lot of effort into hiding all that. But then that will sort of distract you from doing your work, which is why you're there in the first place. Then there's a second layer, and interestingly, if you tell someone, that can be leaked because as soon as you share information, that person might willingly or unwillingly tell someone else, and then you are no longer sort of in control of that information, and that can be in those situations a dangerous thing. Because outside of the international staff members, you have the national staff members who, like I said, are working in the country that they're originally from. So imagine you're working in a country where being gay is punishable by death. Most likely these people are not going to be very accepting of gay international staff members working in their country, treating their patients, because they might, for example, think that it is transmittable, or that you can, I don't know, die because you are in contact with a gay person, whatever they may believe. These beliefs may be so strong, and then especially it's very likely that they will go like, hey, wait, no, we don't want to be treated by, for example, this team, because we know that there's a gay person in there, and we don't know what consequences that may have for our patients. Now, that can be very catastrophic if you are there in the first place to actually give care and aid to people. So even though this is a very sort of individual decision, it can have, I'm not saying that it has in the past or will in the future, I do not know about that, but it can hypothetically have really big consequences.
But how do they deal with this most often? They most often tell or don't tell, as far as you could find?
So that depends on the situation very much. So there are people who are like, whatever happens, I will not tell anyone. There's people who are like, in the beginning, I was way more to myself, but now I'm sort of playing around and just looking for what can be nice opportunities for me to tell. There's people who say that it sort of just happens, like, you know, after a long day at work, you're sitting with a colleague and you're just sipping a cigar or having a cigar and sipping some whiskey, and then you will talk about your personal life, and then it can come up very naturally. So there's very different ways, and it depends on who you're talking to, what country you are in, how long you are there. So there's all these kind of factors playing a role in that. And then what is interesting within this particular organization is that they have a very, very strong security framework. So as you can imagine, that there are certain parts of the world where it's not good to be part of any minority group. So for example, it can be dangerous for women to go to certain countries. Dangerous in terms of they will be treated differently, like seen as inferior, so to say. Same goes for certain religious groups. Like you can imagine that if you are a Christian, devout Christian, you go to a Muslim country and they might find out that that might not be the best thing. Same with nationality. For example, if you're an American citizen and you go to Afghanistan and they find out about that, maybe they will not be as accepting of the help that you're trying to offer. So to sort of accommodate for all these things beforehand, before you go into the field, you get a very strong briefing procedure, which means that you get informed about the social, the legal situation in the country. So everyone will be like, hey, pay attention. If you we are going to have an American on this team, and please refer to him as Canadian, because that is better in this particular situation. So there's lots of care and effort put into the security framework. However, there's one thing that is not in the security framework, which can be in certain situations a dangerous thing to be, which is homosexuality. There's not a single measure to make sure that everyone knows what is going to happen in case you have a gay or a lesbian co-worker on the mission. So that is very interesting, knowing that they put a lot of effort into the security framework. But then this dimension is completely uncovered, whereas in certain situations it may be very dangerous, and it can create real threatening situations, not only for that individual but also for the team, also for the mission.
Damn, that's a really exclusive information, I would say.
Is it?
I don't think I would hear about this anywhere else ever.
So it's in my paper.
Yeah, that's where I can read it.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, because that is an issue, especially for those people, and I also think it's not a big enough issue that media will take it very quickly. That's what I think. And that,
I mean, I'm here with my research. I'm not trying to say that, you know, they should put number one priority on gay people in the organization. Not at all. That's not the point I'm trying to make at all. I know the whole reason why MSF exists. It's to provide humanitarian aid for people who are in need. And they will go on missions. They will stay longer in situations or in certain regions when other organizations have already left. So they are really, I mean, I think they're among the most sort of dedicated humanitarian aid organizations out there. So of course I understand that there's way more important things, and I realize that this is not the point of my research or of any of the people I spoke to. They are not like, okay, whatever we're doing, let's scrap that, let's go for the gay agenda, so to say. That's not what I'm trying to proclaim at all.
No, it makes me think about the question you asked me about the Nigerian woman, and you said that why not in another society like here in the Netherlands, couldn't we help her there? Right, that's what you said. And I would answer that right now, and by what you said is that I agree and disagree at the same time, because I think that yes, we should help, but we don't think we should just help her and the lesbian community, but I think we should just help everybody who is doing shitty in that country. There are still a lot of people who have it shitty, and she just has an extra layer of shit over that by her community not accepting the fact that she might be a lesbian. But I don't think that therefore we should just help her and her smaller community. We should just help the country. We should just help other places that have it not as good as the Western society, let's say.
Yeah.
I think that is, and I think we should rather put our resources on that, and then put our resources on smaller minority groups in those countries, because I think that is an inefficient way of focusing our resources.
But that can be very dangerous, because in those countries that might be seen as very patronizing, like you as a Western sort of imperialist. You are trying to tell me what I can and cannot do, how I should and should not be, what is allowed, what is not allowed. So I'm not sure whether that is the best way to go. Because
you mean to say how they should? What do you mean with that?
So so you're saying that we should not focus on the particular community, but we should try to sort of help the whole state, creating a better society for everyone.
Yeah. Well, in general, I think that. If you're going to do anything, then that makes the most sense to do.
I understand, but I think if we look at it from their perspective, they might see that as, here are the Western...
What's then the difference of helping the lesbian woman in that country and by helping her? That's a similar thing, right? Because you're still going to say like, oh, you can't treat her that way, we're going to take her away, we're going to do something. That's the same tip.
I think it's slightly different, because the example that I gave before sort of mostly focuses, okay, what if we start within our Western societies and sort of try to make sure that everyone, regardless of their sexual identity, will be treated the same way. And then maybe, I'm not saying that will definitively be the case, maybe that will trickle down. Rather than sort of us, Western societies, going to countries, going like, we're going to help the lesbian community in Nigeria because they are facing so many troubles and issues.
Okay, I misunderstood that then.
Yeah, because I think that if you go there, but I'm not sure about this, I can imagine also, historically speaking, that it might be seen as, again, here we have Western people telling us what is right and what is wrong, and they're going to tell us how to live our lives.
Yeah, generally I'm not very somebody who thinks that we should cross borders. That's also why I said that I think that in other countries out of the Western world, it's gonna take deaths to come to the same point of Western society, because I don't think we as a Western society should cross borders and tell people how to live life.
We have done that for too long.
Yeah, we've done it for too long, and we have come here with a lot of deaths. So the only thing I can tell people is that if they want to try to create a society like ours, it's going to cost deaths, I think.
But would they want that? And
that's the question. Like I don't know, but I'm just, if they want that, that's probably what's going to happen. And I am always, what I find sometimes very difficult, and you probably have an opinion about this, is that I don't know to what extent we should because you said that different people are treated equally, like from different minority groups, right? That's what you said.
So, in certain conditions, for example, people who have dyslexia and people who are gay, they face certain the same problems to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Then one thing I can imagine which is different is that when you're dyslexic, you are seen as, for example, in the workplace, you might not be seen as productive as people who do not suffer from dyslexia. And I'm not sure whether, for example, productivity is something that is, I do not know to what extent there's a stereotype, for example, that gay people cannot be as effective or productive. So I can imagine that, for example, that is one dimension in which people with dyslexia are not facing the same ideas or beliefs about their conceivable stigmatized identity compared to gay people.
Yeah. And how do you think that to what extent do you think that we have to change society to include those minority groups to an equal? Because I find it sometimes very difficult to I find it difficult to articulate, but it's like it's very difficult. I find looking at people from a group perspective really difficult, because I know women in positions of power, and I know gay people in positions of power. I know, like, so it's like it's really difficult for me to just look at it from a group way. I way more to look at the people as individuals.
But I think you're maybe a very, very small minority in that. Because people, I mean, like I said before, our social reality is just so complex. So we just know that people categorize people into groups based on, for example, visible characteristics. So inevitably, whenever you see someone walking down the street, you will sort of, first thing you notice is you will see the gender they present as, their approximate age you will have an idea of, and you can see their skin color. So based on these three factors, you can already have an idea of, oh, this is that kind of person with that kind of characteristics. I'm not saying that, I mean, then based on that kind of information, that will maybe serve as input for how we treat them, how we think of them. We just know that categorization is one of the most instantaneous things that happens, right? Because that is one way in which we create cognitive shortcuts to deal with the complex reality.
And I think that in to a big extent that doesn't matter as long as you don't have, like, as long as the people that are around you treat them as individuals. And because I think, like, if I walk in the street and somebody else sees me and is like, oh, that white privileged man walking there, you know, being all his life and having everything good, that's fine as long as he doesn't yell at me, attack me, or does anything. You know what I mean? Like he can have those conceptions in his head, and that's fine. Those stereotypes, you know, that doesn't really affect me.
But it can also be dangerous, because they can talk about it with other people, and then, you know, you can sort of create a spiral almost. Yeah, well,
like I said, like, as long as they don't attack other people, or, you know, then it goes too far.
Or treat them differently.
And, yeah, well, that's the thing, is like, as long as they keep seeing the people around them as the individuals, so they might think that about me while I'm walking there, but they might also have white friends, white male friends, and they treat them just like normal people, because those people have broken that stereotype, and they've realized, oh, not everybody is that way.
Yeah.
But whenever they're walking on the street without that white friend next to them, they don't realize that, you know? And I think that in that extent, it's fine. So it's like, you have to, and if you're a boss and you hire a new somebody, you should try to look at the individual, even if that person is white, black, or female, or whatever. You know, you should just look at it as, then you should realize that as an individual. And I think that's more of an thing that we should teach people, that everybody you meet and everybody you talk to, treat them as an individual and try to look further than what you see. That's a very basic thing. I almost feel like, you know, that's almost simple to teach, you know, like, it's not everybody. Like, if you see people walking on the street, sure, I have stereotypes, you know, it's also funny to make stereotype jokes about it. I do that with my friends sometimes, and it's like, and that's fine, as long as once you see that person and they talks to you, you treat them as an individual and you don't assume 1,000 things about them, it's fine.
I agree, and I think this is very idealistic.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Because, I mean, there's overwhelming evidence that people will just not be able to see individuals, for example, walking down the street. You will get to know an individual once you start talking to them. You will get to know maybe their hopes and dreams or their fears or whatever.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we will not have that opportunity because there's just too many people to get to know individually.
Isn't that fine?
I don't think it is, because then we get into this whole idea of this person looks like such and such, and therefore they have to be like this and this and this and this. They have to have these kind of characteristics, for example. That's sort of an inherent link to each other. So, for example, what I was saying before, if we see a man, we think of him as competitive and, you know, dominant and assertive and those kind of things. We are less likely to think that of a woman you see down the street.
Yeah, but so what I'm seeing is that I think that those stereotypes are fine, because as long as the people around me treat me as me and as my individual self, then they don't apply those things on me. And if everybody does that in their single communities, then it's fine that me looking at somebody else from another group,
Mm-hmm.
I use all my stereotypes or whatever
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not meeting them, and that's fine.
Mhm.
But that person in his group is going to be seen as an individual,
Mm-hmm.
and is going to be treated as an individual. So even if he, let's say, I can think of see a man and think of it like, with all those things, like it should be masculine, and he doesn't feel like that at all. But I'm
Mhm.
assuming that, and because I see him walk on the street.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe in his own group he's honest about it. In his own group he has a relationship with people he trusts, because that's
Mhm.
what I would wish everybody has.
Mm-hmm.
And those people will treat him the way he wants to be treated,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter what my opinion about him is, or my idea about him is, or my idea about how people should act. It doesn't matter. It doesn't, because it shouldn't matter to the individual what other people that they don't know think of them. It should only matter what people around you think of you and the way they treat you.
I'm not sure about that either. For example, there's this like you have this I don't know to what extent it is supported by data, but there's this idea that if people ask like, what do you think of Moroccan immigrants, for example,
Mhm.
people go, I'm not sure, they can be this and that and that. They have all
Mhm.
kinds of ideas of Moroccan immigrants, but then we ask them, but what do you think of your neighbor who is a Moroccan immigrant? Oh no, they're cool, we
Yeah.
hang out every month and we do this and that together.
Mhm.
So yes, I do agree that it is easy. I mean, yes, we should see people who we are close to as individuals, but oftentimes that will not be the same as how we see the group that they belong to,
Mhm.
right? Just for example, based on this one Moroccan neighbor that you have, you will not see all Moroccan immigrants in the exact same way as you see your neighbor.
Mhm.
Whereas I think the other way around is very likely. When you just have an idea of Moroccan immigrants in general, they are such and such and such, and then you know that there is a Moroccan immigrant moving in next door to you. In the beginning, you will have all kinds of ideas of what that person will probably be like,
Mhm.
and then you get to meet them and you see like, oh, actually they're this and this and this and this, very different from what I expected in the first place.
Mhm.
But I think the opposite process is not as likely to happen. That based on this one Moroccan individual, you will think of all Moroccan people in the exact same way.
Yeah, that's true.
If I explain it.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like the stereotype doesn't change based on your individual meeting with that person.
I think
Yeah,
people are
you
more
don't
likely
think-
to infer from a group
Mm-hmm.
membership than sort of that that they're going to extrapolate based on this one individual to a group.
Yeah, but I still don't see how that matters. Because I don't see, like, if you as an individual, if you're still being treated as an individual, even if you're a Moroccan in the group and people have those assumptions on you,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't matter as long as they treat you as an individual with respect, and they're not people running after Moroccan people with swords or whatever. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And like, as long as they're not being attacked and publicly yelled at and stuff like that, it's fine to have assumptions about people.
Well,
That's I don't see why that is the problem. I haven't. Yeah.
so that depends where you draw the line, right?
Mhm.
So if we take this one example, that can have very real consequences. So let's say you are a recruiter for a job agency. And you
Mhm.
have a Moroccan immigrant who is your neighbor, and you're like, oh, that's a cool guy. We hang out with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But then you are, for your work, you have to recruit certain people, and you have lots of applications, and there's one Moroccan immigrant. Is it likely that you will judge that Moroccan immigrant based on your neighbor who you think is cool, or more sort of the general idea that you have of?
Yeah, but I don't think you should judge him at all.
No, you shouldn't, but it's happening.
Yeah, but what I mean with that is that you should just look at it from I think you can do that, right? You can look at exactly the same way as you look at the other people.
You
Like,
can, but I think in reality that's just not happening. That's what I mean by it. I mean, I like this idea. It would be great if that's how we could live our lives, but I just don't think that is.
I think it can be over. I think it's a more. I think it will be done over years, over time. Because I think that what happens very often is that when new groups arise, there is a negative stereotype around them, and over time they get rid of that negative stereotype. It becomes more positive.
Mm-hmm.
That's often the case.
Yeah.
I think that 30 years ago the stereotype about gay people is more negative than now,
Mm-hmm.
and the same thing with Moroccan people
Mm-hmm.
in the Netherlands. And I
But
think
there are still negative stereotypes.
there are still negative stereotypes, of course, but it's still relatively a new young group. Like, now you have the Syrian people who came to the Netherlands that have a more negative stereotype over them than there are, than they actually as an individual are. But it's like they're just these stereotypes because they're a new burden for society that to take care of, and the first society is negative among them, and more people are negative, and the less people get negative about them, the more positive the stereotype becomes. And I feel like I think that I do agree with you. I'm not so sure if people can separate the two all the time. I mean, evidence shows they can't.
And it takes a lot of, I think, practice, time, effort that maybe people don't want to spend because there's more important stuff, like, being able to feed yourself and your family. And like, why would I next to these sort of more basic tasks?
But I would say that what I find is weird is, like, I would say that if your job is to be a recruiter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
In this case. Yeah.
Yes.
Then your job is to be objective with recruiting people.
Yes.
And if then you can't do that, then you're just bad at your job and you should just be fired.
That is true. But
That's
then...
yeah.
But I mean, there is a reason why oftentimes certain candidates more likely to be hired.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a bias there. It's not possible to be completely objective for whatever reason that may be, whether it's socialization or whether it's all these ideas about stereotypes of people. But it's impossible about this recruiter to be completely objective.
Yeah. Well, I'm not so. Sometimes what I sometimes feel like is that it more has to do with the fact that older people hold often positions of power, and older people often have older stereotypes in their heads.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has more to do with that. And also they are more used to using stereotypes in the same way and less treating people as individuals. Because over the last 50 years, we've become way more individualized as a society than even 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my grandma still went to the same bakery that was at her church, it's just so ridiculous how confined it then was, and now it's so much more free. So I think that in that sense, the people who now still hold power still use those stereotype structures in the way they always have used to. And I think that is going to change once, if some younger people have that position of power. I think that it's automatically going to change more. I think that my generation, and maybe even the people that are 30 by now, have a better way of judging an individual, like this Moroccan guy who got recruited, for instance. I think people that are younger are more raised of that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think I partly agree with you, but at the same time, I think there's sort of this collective idea. I do not know how to explain it, but I think so. Yes, I agree with you that as generations sort of pass, ideas will change and beliefs will change, but not completely. It's not like we're completely overriding the previous beliefs that we have. We're sort of updating them, I think.
Yes.
So there is sort of a solid base, but then we are changing things, taking things, adding things, whatever. Yeah. So I think that there will be a core in our belief system that, for example, I don't know, I do not know an example at this point, but I think there will be things that are so core to our belief system, even over generations, that will stay the same, but then sort of the way that, for example, shows itself, or how, what kind of things change. That is definitely there is definitely room for change in that sense.
Yeah, the question is,
and one of the things, of course, that will help is technology. Because of the technology, we will be able to reach out so many more things. There's also a danger in there because of the whole fake news and whatever. Mm-hmm. But we can get more in contact with individuals as individuals, rather than reading in the newspaper about this and that happened to that group of people. We can now more easily get into contact with the individuals. At the same time, like I said, there's the whole fake news, people catfishing, whatever, trolling, blah blah blah. So there's also lots of danger, but also lots of possibilities. There are
a lot of more possibilities to have more information about groups of people you're not a part of.
I think so. And individuals within those groups of peoples.
For instance, for me with the LGBT community, is that I don't know a lot about it. I my parents don't know a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
But
many people don't.
But if I Google it or look it up on Facebook, there's a lot of information to find.
Yeah.
And I can even go towards so I can know a lot about the general, but I can also very easily probably find actually a gay or lesbian person to talk to if I wanted to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's way more easy than 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So that could help if you actively would do that.
But maybe you would be likely to do that, but there's lots of people out there who are not likely to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, for example, they don't care, or they think that they know a lot already, which is, it's a bit problematic if you think that, but hey, sure, you do you. But then, that is something that you maybe are actively interested in. Like, hey, this is something that I don't know anything about. I would like to learn more. I would like to educate myself. Yeah. There's also lots of people who are like, I don't necessarily have to know anything about this. It's okay. Then it's very difficult to also, for example, adopt new beliefs about, for example, gay people. Yeah. Because there will, like what I said before, there will be this core of belief, like, for example, gay people are very flamboyant, very extravagant, very like, look at me being very flaunting their sexuality. Like, there's a portion of gay people who does that. There's also a lot of gay people who don't like that. Yeah. So if we sort of continue to believe in this kind of, again, that's part of the core. And then people are, I think, now starting to open up more to the possibility of, hey, gay people are a very heterogeneous group as well. Mm-hmm. They can come in all kinds of ways, basically. Yeah. And that, I think, is aided by both technological advancement, but also media and representation and visibility. That's very important.
More, just also in general, like more people coming out.
Exactly.
Because then you suddenly have someone at your workplace who is gay, and you're like, I never expected him to be gay because he doesn't act like it. You know, that's what people would say. And then you're like, what do you mean we act like it? You know, like
see, and that's a very narrow-minded sort of idea of what being gay is like. Yeah. Like we all have this idea of, if you're gay, then you dress like such and such, and you behave like such and such, and you talk like such and such. Mm-hmm. But I think more and more, I hope that there is a growing group of people who realizes, hey, that's actually not the case. There's so much more heterogeneity even within this supposedly very similar group. And as long as people are opening up their minds to that idea, I think we're heading in the right direction. Yeah. And like you said before, that's going to be a very, very long process. But that just because it's a long and difficult process doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage in it.
Yeah, and sometimes I sometimes think that it might be faster than we are aware of, because it sounds so hard, but in the next 30 years, a lot of people are going to die who are just older and have older ideas. And I think that that's going to change a lot in our world and in factors like this. I think that's going to be younger people who are 30 are going to be 60 by then in the next 30 years. And then people who are 60 are going to be 90, and everybody who's above 90 is just going to be unlucky, let's say.
Very likely, yes.
But that's very likely, and I think that's just going to change society so quickly, because the way that society has changed already so quickly in the last years, and I think that that's just going to change everything so much. Like the way that we interact with each other, but even in an international way, like you were speaking, that maybe we'll interact with other countries in other ways, and maybe more likely to accept each other, because one of the biggest changes in the world is that internet comes to all places in the world, not everywhere yet, but that's sadly, but that does change a lot of things. Like in countries that are highly Islamic, for instance, it changes the way that they suddenly realize, like, hey, I don't have to be religious. Like everybody in the West a lot of people in the West aren't that religious, and you know, they have other things and they have more freedom, and actually I would like to have that. And now they can see it on their phone all the time wherever they are, and it changes a lot in countries. You know, I've seen that.
Or they realize that they can be religious, but not in the way that is sort of normally practiced. They can sort of decide for themselves, like, hey, I like this part of the religion that I am affiliated with, but I choose to reject this kind of thing. Yes. So I do not know what point that was trying to make, but I said it.
I said it. Well, I think we also have to round it off, so I want to thank you. It was a great conversation.
Thank you very much as well.
I learned a lot.
I did too. It was very interesting, very inspiring.
Well, maybe we'll do some other time then.
That would be exciting.
Well, thank you for coming, and thank you to the listeners for listening and the watchers for watching, and see you soon, maybe.